Well, that sucked. I might have been a little wrong that the Nuggets would win Game 7. I was half right, but I was half very wrong. This is Locked On Nuggets.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, win or lose, even when the season is over. Thanks for joining us and making us part of your day. Appreciate you guys being with us and being an everydayer. We're still going to have shows Monday through Friday, continuing into the offseason as the Denver Nuggets season is over. The quest for a repeat is done. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you guys being with us. My name is Matt Moore. I'm a senior NBA writer for the Action Network. I just got back from Denver, where I watched the Denver Nuggets choke away a 20-point halftime lead, or third quarter lead, of a Game 7, becoming the first team to lose a lead larger than 11 in Game 7, the first team to lose a 20-point lead in a Game 7, and to do so at home as their quest for a championship ends. Let's talk about this. Just real quick. Matt, you jinxed us. Okay. Maybe I did. I usually come on this show and I'm like the even kill. I'm like, I don't know, man. Nothing. I don't know. I don't make predictions a whole lot. Like, I don't. I made one here. I was very confident. I was like, the Nuggets going to win this game. Home teams win Game 7. That's what happens in NBA history. And the Nuggets, blah, 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 and all these things. And like I talked about the adjustments. And you know what? All the adjustment stuff was right. This was not an adjustment game. The Wolves didn't make big adjustments in the second half. That didn't happen. The Wolves had more in the tank. And the Wolves were able to be better later in the game. Congrats to the Minnesota Timberwolves. They're an awesome team. I love watching the squad. This is the best defense I've seen in 20 years. This is a phenomenal squad. I love their chemistry. I'm so happy for Karl Anthony Towns, when I've been one of the few guys that's been like, no, like he wants to win. He just doesn't know how to do it. I've been the guy that said that about him. I've defended Rudy Gobert this season and said how he's gotten better. I think Anthony Edwards is amazing. I love Mike Conley. I've done that forever. Congrats to them. They were the better team, and they won this series. The point differential proves that out. Going to talk about point differential, by the way. All of those things are absolutely true. And the biggest reason the Nuggets lost a 20-point lead and choked in Game 7 is because the Minnesota Timberwolves kicked their ass. They challenged every possession, and they had more at the end of the game. For the last, honestly, I don't know. Let's see. It's May. 2 months. For the last 2 months, the Nuggets have been trying to get by. That the quest for a repeat was draining for them. We're going to talk a lot about that in the second segment, about what the cause of that was. But if you look in this game and you want to know exactly what happened, the Nuggets burned so much energy in building their lead. And they played so great in the second quarter. Like, that did happen, and that matters. The Nuggets were not killed this entire game. They built a 20-point lead, which makes the collapse that much worse. But it also shows you that when the Nuggets were able to play to their capacity, their defense in the second quarter was phenomenal. Jamal Murray played great in this game in the first half. I thought that when he came out was chucking, I was like, oh no, this is going to go badly. But he found his shot and he played awesome. And Joker was taking it to Gobert and everything was working. And they played Joker extra minutes and then they ran out of gas. This is not to say that the Wolves don't play a part in that. They wore Denver out. They wore them out. And Denver didn't have enough. Denver was not built the way that it needed to survive a team like Minnesota, who came at them possession after possession after possession over and over and over again. And that's why they lost. Joker was gassed in this game, and it was evident in the third quarter. You could tell. And I've said that a lot about him in this season. I said it in the Lakers series. I said it down the stretch of the regular season. I said he looked tired. And this is the first time I've seen him look that way, because he's always found that extra gear. And he found it enough to beat Anthony Davis down the court and still beat that guy in 5 games. But he couldn't get past this Wolves team because the Wolves are so much better. They wore him out. And him taking 10 threes in this game, despite him hitting too late that makes it look a little better, was him settling. Joker didn't have it in the third quarter. He did not have anything left. And he needed somebody to pick him up, and they couldn't. And we can argue about if that's fair or not, because guess what? This team isn't built for guys to play together and have it all be everyone contributes. That's not how the team is built. This team is built around Nikola Jokic to carry them. He's the MVP. He's supposed to be the best player in the world. I think he was until probably tonight. It's hard to beat that when you lose in the second round. I would still say he's the best player in the world. The whole team is built around Joker. This is why I kept talking about the Jamal thing. Yes, Jamal makes the two-man game go. Cool. Joker is the one that the entire team is built around. So when you're like, well, they got to be able to win without him. No, they didn't. No. Joker's got to win his minutes, and they did not win the Nikola Jokic minutes in the series, and that is not just on Joker. It is just as much on Michael Porter Jr., who was terrible in the series. It was just as much on Aaron Gordon, who was terrible in the losses. It is and finished with the worst plus minus on the team. It's just as much on KCP, and it's just as much on Jamal Murray. It's just as much on Michael Malone. It's just as much on Calvin Booth. But the team is built around Nikola Jokic. That's the promise. It's like the starting five, right? The best starting five in basketball, and they lost their minutes in this series, and they lost them consistently and by a lot. And that's a big problem. The question, like Dr. Van de Strand, is like, DJ couldn't have given Yoke a little breather? Probably not. The game sevens, the possessions are too tight. You just can't get away with it. You can't put DJ out there. Ant will carve him up. Conley will carve him up. They knew that. They knew that roster construction going in. The team that played tonight, outside of they thought probably Peyton Watson could play a little bit more, this team is what they envisioned. This is how they built that team. Like, they built this team for the starters to play 40 plus minutes in a game 7. That's how they built it. And every time before, Joker has had so much more energy. And he didn't have it. That's the expectation. Like, here's the thing. Joker was better than all of the other Nuggets. Joker is supposed to be better than all the other Nuggets. Joker is supposed to play to a level he did not get to. All of the other Nuggets are supposed to get to a level they did not get to. And that's why the Denver Nuggets are now done for the season. And that's on, we could talk about if that's on coaching. I think I don't think Michael Malone had a good season. We could talk about if it's on Joker or Jamal or MPJ. We talk about all these type of things. And then the answer is like they all share in it. That's how team sports work. They all share in that. But you're not going to ever be able to get to a spot of, with me, where I'm just like, Joker was fine, everyone else failed him. No, like, Joker wasn't good in the third quarter and in the second half. Got beat. The rebounds, second chance rebounds, Jamal got beat on one. The Cat one was horrific, but Joker was there too and didn't have the energy to get those boards. They got all those second chance boards at the end of the game, and that was crushing. All right. Up next, we'll talk about Porter, about my thoughts on his series, about whether or not he needs to go, because that's the thing up. We'll talk about the bench, because I think it's got to be talked about DNVR uses the phrase Project Dynasty, if that was a good plan. And we'll kind of talk about if this was surprising or not on the other side here on Locked On Nuggets. Today's show is brought to you by Yahoo Finance. Wouldn't it be great if you could see all your investment retirement accounts in one place? With Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and access the expert analysis you need to tend to your entire portfolio with confidence. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or looking for the extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. They're the #1 finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. Securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. That's the #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. We're also brought to you today by Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball or hockey entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. They offer quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types. That's what makes Prize Picks the #1 fantasy sports app. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Just download the app and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you guys being with us on a Monday after the Nuggets lose. I appreciate you guys listening. It's been a great season. Appreciate all the support from everybody. What about Porter? So if you're ranking the blame for this series and why the Nuggets lost, outside of the Wolves were better and are an awesome team because they deserve the most credit in the world, I actually would put Jamal first. If Jamal is able to give them anything in game one, they might steal that game. And that doesn't mean that they win in 6 or 5, but it changes maybe the way that the series plays out. And Jamal not being able to give them enough in games 1 or game 2 or game 5 or 6 rather was meaningful. So I would have to put the blame first on Jamal if we're doing blame pie. I think Malone didn't coach a bad series. I don't think he coached a good series. He wasn't worked. He did do things that adjusted and really did get the Wolves on their heels in 3, 4, 5 and had a chance to close out the team and had them up 20 in the second half. So like Malone did not get out coached in the series, but ultimately managing some of the big picture stuff, I think falls on him. Third in that would be Jokic, just because Jokic has to get the most, like Jokic is the best player. He can't just get all the praise and then nothing else. Now, if Joker had played awesome and perfect, and I was like, no, man, I would say, I can't put this on Joker. He was incredible. He played great defense. He was awesome from start to finish. He was efficient. He had great shot selection. He did everything. They just missed shots. Then I would say that. That's not what happened. Joker was not able to create enough for the Nuggets in the second half. And he was gassed, and that's part of it. And he has an incredible load to carry. It's insane how much they rely on him. But guess what? That's how the team is built, and that's why he gets paid so much money per year. Heavy is the crown. And then there's Porter. Look, Michael Porter Jr. is not a perfect player, and he has glaring holes. And he regressed big time in a series that was not only physical but mentally exhausting, and he wasn't up to the challenge. Porter had a great series versus the Lakers. He had a great series last year versus the Lakers. He had a good series versus the Suns. He had a good series versus the Wolves last year. He struggled in the Heat series and in this series. There are series that are good for players and bad for players when they're not the star players. And I said, like, well, he's a role player, and everyone kind of pointed at the contract. And I get that, right? I understand that. And I think you can say that MPJ's overpaid, and that's correct. He hasn't evolved his game to where he's able to be more than a role player, but also they don't want him to be that. They want him to run to the corners, shoot threes, and rebound. That's how they envision Michael Porter Jr.'s role. So you can't be like, why can't he create any off of the dribble? He didn't do that at all during the regular season because they didn't need him to on the way to the 2 seed and 57 wins. You can't sit here and be like, why didn't he do more? You could say, why didn't he do better with what he did? Now, every Nugget to a man, when asked about Porter's struggle, said the same thing, including Malone and Murray. They're guarding him. They stayed attached to Porter the entire time. The Wolves got better at their sequences as the series went on. And they said from the very beginning, we're not getting beat by Michael Porter Jr. on doubles on Joker. We're not doing it. We are not getting beat on those. Michael Porter Jr. is not going to beat us. Aaron Gordon might beat us, but they got better on those sequences too. And that's a credit to Rudy Gobert and how he defended. But I'm not saying that like Porter doesn't deserve blame here. Okay. He's got to hit shots. that's what he's there for. And so when he does get those opportunities, when he has transition looks, he has to knock them down. And this has been a problem I've had with him for so long. Last year, he contributed in so many ways. He really did. He contributed in rebounding and defense, and he did all these things, and he was a better, more overall player in those playoffs. But in this matchup, the Wolves negated him down to, you better hit all of your looks, and he didn't. And this is a problem, is like when you don't have a diversified game and you don't do the one thing that you do, the question becomes, what are you good for? Because he wasn't good defensively. He was terrible defensively, and he was really behind. He got shook in this series. And that's a real problem. Michael Tefera says he's 6'10 and a great shooter. How isn't he more than a role player? So here's one of the things. At his size, he can't navigate. He doesn't have great handle. He's never had great handle. Is he supposed to be a post-up player? Does that seem like the type of game that he's supposed to do? No. He's supposed to hit key sequences in these kind of actions. And look, the answer might have to be that this is unsustainable, and that in order to get the depth that they need, they're going to have to trade Porter in order to get more role players to replace the loss of Bruce Brown. They win this series with Bruce Brown. That's not the Nuggets' fault. They couldn't retain him. That's not how it goes. But they missed Bruce Brown in the series. They missed Jeff Green a little bit. Little bit. Would have been nice to have Jeff Green for some small ball 5 lineups. Would have been nice to have the body. Matthew says, I just came here to give my 2 cents that MPJ is a max player, so he should have max expectations. That's not how the NBA works. Okay. I understand the reasoning. He gets paid all this money. Why doesn't he play like that? Okay. There's max contracts. The value of Nikola Jokic as a max player is not the same as Michael Porter Jr. And the Nuggets paid Porter what they did because they could not lose him, because if they lost him, they just lose him. And then they still have these 2 max contracts and they can't do anything with it. So the options were lose him or keep him at the number. So they kept him at the number. That's how that goes. You can't sit there and be like, well, he has a max contract, so he should be a max player. That's not how this works in the NBA. There's a lot of guys on max contracts that are not max players because of the context of the team. And that to me is a real issue. Aaron says, do the Nuggets coaches tell him to work on his ball handling skills? Sure. Everybody wants to work on everything. But the Nuggets also, very specifically, the only way you can do a lot of this stuff is if you do it in game. You have to do it in game. And Porter doesn't have any room in that because the Nuggets offense usually works so well that it's able to get to a level to where they don't need it. And that didn't happen. So my only thing here is that it's fair to have high expectations for Porter and say he failed them. Porter had a miserable series, and he's a big reason they lost. That's fair to say. And if you want to move him, you can, but you'll lose a lot of what made the starting lineup so dynamic when they won the NBA title last year, the Nuggets' only title. Porter was a huge part of that. But that also gets into a big problem, which is the Nuggets' offense was never the same this year. We're going to talk about that in the third segment. Info Messi says, Malone has been carried by Jokic for a decade. He would be third team ESPN in another life. Everyone that has a gripe that had to shut up when the Nuggets won is going to come out of the woodwork. So if you hate Jamal, as many of the itches do, it's going to be Jamal's fault. And if you didn't like Malone, it's going to be Malone's fault. And the people outside Denver that don't love Jokic, guess what? Joker's a fraud. Everyone just uses his confirmation bias instead of kind of analyzing what actually happened or taking a more holistic look. And you shouldn't do that. You should try and be better than that. It's more important to be accurate than feel right. And that's really important. This is something I take very seriously every single day on this show and in all my coverage. I'm willing to be wrong. And I was wrong about Game 7. I stand by the analysis. Nuggets didn't get beat tactically in Game 7. I expected the Nuggets to do what they've done every single time that they've been in the spot, and they didn't do it. And that's a credit to the Wolves. But I think the analysis was sound. On the other side, I want to talk about the offense and about the warning signs that we probably should have paid more attention to coming down the stretch of the season. Plus the debate between, was it the Spurs game or was it all of the games around the Spurs game? We'll do that next here on Locked On Nuggets. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. Oof, this is a tough read for Colorado sports fans this weekend. And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bets. If you want to bet the team that beat the Nuggets to win the title, you can do that. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. You can petty bet and just bet against the Wolves because they beat the Nuggets. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us and making this part of your day. There were warning signs here, and the Nuggets. So, look, I was going to do the show. Okay, I got home, said hi to my wife. It was very sad. She's heartbroken. She's a hardcore Avs fan and has become a very diehard Nuggets fan, and she's very crushed. Tough weekend for her. And I was going down and she was like, don't gloat. And I was like, why would I gloat? I feel terrible. Like, this is awful for the community. Like, this is a really rough way for the Nuggets teams in the end. She's like, because you've been talking about how the Nuggets offense wasn't as good and that the numbers said they weren't as good for months. Don't gloat. And I was like, okay, that's fair. I'm not going to gloat. What I will say, and this sucks. And I feel really bad for Nuggets fans. Hang in there. We're going to get you through it. The offense wasn't explosive as last year, and that was pretty evident. And there were numbers along the way that kind of indicated it. The net rating always said that the starters were as good. It was like, oh, you couldn't really, like, you had to really dig and find stuff because the defense got so much better. And this is interesting because for years I was like, well, you have to have a more balanced team. And then last year kind of swung me the other way where I was like, man, all that really matters is like, if your defense is good enough and then your offense is elite, you can win the title. That's like what last year proved to me. And this year, the Nuggets offense was great. It was top 5. It was superb. It wasn't as explosive. It was just really consistently good. Great. Top 5. But it wasn't this like, oh my God level that it hit last season. And versus the Wolves, it never got there really outside of game 5 with Joker just cooking one-on-one. Maybe a little bit of game 4. They were a more balanced team this year, but they were not special offensively. And that, I think, a lot was shooting. They just weren't as good of a shooting team this year. There was like these little tiny areas where they weren't as good. Joker wasn't quite as good around the rim as he usually is. The starters weren't quite as good from 3-point range as they were. They just weren't quite as good. That starting unit was better overall because they played together so much and they did such a better job defensively. But they lost something in terms of how special the offense was. And some of that's like teams have gotten better at covering them, but there are always counters. And I do think that they ran back a lot without innovating. I think they were predictable this year. They were still tough as hell to guard, which is why they had a top 5 offense and finished with 57 wins. But they were just a little bit more predictable. The other thing is the Spurs game question. Again, I said that you shouldn't focus on being like confirmation bias, right? So I could be wrong here. Maybe it really was that game. My question about the Spurs game, when everyone brings this up, is what difference would it really have made? Because you are almost definitely facing Minnesota in the conference finals. Even if you've gotten the 1 seed and it was Thunder Wolves, the Wolves are probably winning that series. You probably beat the Mavericks, probably, not definitely. The Mavericks are a tough defensive team too, and they have Luka and Kyrie. Tough matchup. But you probably get past that series. You make the conference finals. But then you're probably still facing Minnesota. And yeah, it's another round. Maybe they're more tired. But so is Denver. For me, this is not about that. You just would have delayed it until the conference finals. The problem was the Nuggets burned too much. This is what happened. Like, I will not dispute this because this is the quotes that came from the players and coaches. After the Nuggets got back from All-Star break, they talked about the text message from Joker. And Malone, though, in that week before practice, before the All-Star break, the post-All-Star break, he said, I don't think seeding is as important as us getting healthy. We got to be rested and ready for the playoffs. That was Malone's line. Malone wasn't chasing the 1. But then the Nuggets started winning. They played awesome basketball for 2 weeks. They played phenomenal basketball for about 3 weeks, honestly. And then it started to tail off, and they weren't quite as good in the win over Utah, and they weren't quite as good. They had to come back from double digits from Toronto, but they were still winning. And so now all of a sudden they're in this battle for the 1 seed, and they just had to push to the end. Jamal gets hurt, but they're still within range of the 1. So they push all the way to the end. And that to me is like a massive part of this story, is that when we say the Nuggets ran out of gas in the fourth quarter of Game 7, to me that's tied to the fact that, and Malone talked about this post game. He talked about how they had to push to stay competitive because you really were worried about getting passed by everybody. You don't want to fall to 4 or 5, right? That's dangerous. But they probably could have managed it, still gotten the third. Let the Wolves and Thunder run away with it and manage this. They have to go into Minnesota for a Game 7. Do they win that series? Maybe not. But they wouldn't have ran out of gas. And so if we look at this and we go, they would have ran out of gas. Did they win Game 7 in Minnesota? I don't know. They seem better, right? The Wolves seem better. Steve Augustine says, Matt, do you really think the Wolves that were that better than the Nuggets, that no matter what, they were going to lose? No, this is a difference. The Wolves were better in this series. I think they're evenly matched teams. The Wolves were better in this series. They outplayed Denver. They were the better team in this series. And as a result, it's fair to say that they were the better team this season because ultimately you are judged on the results. I could talk about like, well, theoretically in like a hyper world, like if both teams played at their absolute best, blah, 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 but that's not what happened. You played this 7-game series and this is the result. This is what happened. So to me, that's like a large part of this kind of question. Van Thor says, this is all cope. Nuggets are just the inferior team to the Wolves, and this was borne out. Scoreboard. Okay, thanks, man. I've tried as hard as possible to give the Wolves all the credit in the world. This is what's really frustrating is like you try and give them credit, and they still won't take it. Jovan, Mrgodic. Oh, an itch. I'm so surprised. Matt is guilty for this. He destroyed everything after Game 2. I've never seen anything like that. You are an energy vampire. Hey, I'm sorry. Around these parts, we hold people accountable. I don't know what y'all do, but over here, that's what we do, is we hold folks accountable. Sorry. This is a front office question. This is something that Jeremy's been yelling in the chat pretty consistently. This is a front office issue more than anything. The new CBA makes this stuff hard. Like, I have a hard time being able to judge this. Like, I asked Brendan Vogt of DMVR after the game. I was like, is Project Dynasty a failed concept or not? He's like, I don't know. And I think it's like an interesting question, right? Justin Holiday was like the second best Nugget in the series. He's a +10 tonight, by the way. It's a veteran that gave them good minutes in the playoff series when they needed it. Christian played awesome defense in this series and was a net positive. Christian had a great playoff series versus the Wolves. Wasn't good versus the Lakers. Was great in this series. Christian still doesn't give you enough offensively. There was talk coming into the season about Christian taking over Bruce Brown's role, and Christian's not anywhere close to that. Even with an improved jump shot, he just can't create enough. And there are a lot of sequences, and you saw this in times in the second half even, where the offense would stall out with Christian on the floor in various spots. That's not Christian's fault. He might get there in time, but he's not there yet. Peyton was phenomenal the first 4 months of the season, and then basically had like a bad 3-week stretch, and that's it. He's out of the rotation. Like, that's it. And there's going to be a tension point between you have to take the time to develop these guys so they're ready, and they're not ready, and we can't afford to take the time to get them ready. And I don't know how to balance that. Like, are you willing to win 45 games and get a 6 seed if it means that your young guys develop to the degree that you need? Does that give you an opportunity to win? This is why veterans are like the easier answer. That's why the Bucks chose that route, which is not sustainable, and you cycle through them. The NBA has made it so difficult. And that's where like this idea of major change comes in, of the most likely candidate being MPJ, of, hey, what if you just traded one big contract for several smaller ones so you have more versatility? Would that have helped? If you had a backup 5 and you had a backup 4 and you had a backup 3 and you could do more lineup combinations, if you had a better version of Justin Holiday, like an upgraded version of that, could you have switched that in? All those kind of dynamics. On the other hand, they won a title with this group, and they were absolutely phenomenal. And that to me is really tough. Ted says, I just hate that we got nothing from the Rooks. Not that I expected them to take on serious playoff minutes, but the young guys clearly didn't develop enough. The pushback will be like, did they get a chance to develop enough? Jalen Pickett got no floor time. They could have used another backup point guard. No floor time. But was he ready? Did he show anything in the G League that made you think he was ready? Did he show anything when he was on the floor that made you think that? Because it definitely didn't make an imprint on the coaching staff enough for him to get the opportunity. Same thing for Julian Strother, who had his moments this season, but overall, bit player. These guys were also drafted in spots where you usually get bit players. And so being like, they need to be like rotation guys was always a risky concept. That's really tough. You know how I know it's off-season time and the Nuggets have lost? Because people with names like Darius Dragomir says trade Jokic to Dallas. He's getting wasted here. Guys, you won a title last year. Can you just have a little bit of sense? Ted says, no, they didn't get enough chances because the starters were having to play so many minutes in so many random games. Not wrong. You have to take such a feeling of, it's really hard to be like, we're going to contend for a title, but we're going to develop young guys. Like, this is the two timelines problem that the Warriors ran into, and it was a disaster. Like, it's hard. Like, that's hard to manage. And that's why it's easier just to plug in veterans. Like, that's just an easier approach. Cedric says, we need KCP. What's the plan to retain him? Yeah, this will be an interesting one. I don't know what the market's going to be like. So the key here is that there's not a lot of teams with cap space, but the ones that do have a bunch. I just don't know if they're the kind of teams that are going to want to go for KCP. Now, there might be like a sign and trade opportunity that might be good, but also I think a lot of it's going to depend on like, what does KCP want and what kind of number does he want? If he wants the bag, what are you going to do? And I think that gets really tough. I will say it's going to be very, very difficult. Let me put it this way. The Nuggets ownership group invested, spent extra money, and went into the luxury tax to finance a title team, and it won. And they were happy to pay that again. Now they have a second round out team. Do you pay more money for a team that just lost in the second round? That just gave up a 20-point lead in game 7? Even though you were in a 1-point game with 6 minutes left in the game 7? Is that what you do? I think that's tough. Progressive Overlaid says PCP, I think it's KCP, was cooked by Ant most of the series. Yeah, man, it's a bad matchup. You cannot overreact to these individual things. The players just aren't going to be, the non-superstars are not going to be great series to series to series. That's just not how it's going to go. Heck, Ant wasn't great throughout the course of this series. He had games where he was the best player in the series, but they didn't win game 7 because Ant was the best player on the court. Jokic was the best player on the court. They got beat because the Wolves were better. I do think that in general, this team still continues to look like the Spurs. That the Spurs never repeated. And Jokic is a lot more like Duncan. Jamal Murray talked a lot at postgame about how hard it was being the hunted this year. That they weren't as hungry. And I do think that that's a big part of this. That I do think hubris got the better of Denver. I think Denver thought that they could do it all. I think that they relied this season on continuity, a great home performance that ultimately got exposed in the playoffs, a great starting 5. Jokic is amazingness. He is amazing. He is an incredible player. But they also were clutch merchants. They won all these games in clutch time, and I kept being like, I don't know if this is like a sustainable way to win. The Nuggets have to get to a point. I'll just say this. The Wolves had a better point differential this season. The Thunder had a better point differential this season. A lot of Eastern Conference teams did. I don't think that the Nuggets are like the 4th or 5th. I don't think they're worse than the Thunder. But what I am saying is the Nuggets do have to return to a spot where they are a dominant team. Like, you have to be a dominant team. You cannot just out-clutch these games. It's too variance-based. It's Rudy Gobert hitting a spinning turnaround fadeaway out of a timeout. It's just too many. It's Karl Anthony Towns getting an offensive putback. It's too thin a margin for you to win consistently that way. It's great that they have this clutch gene in them. They came to rely on it too much this season. They thought they could get by and win a title, and you can't. And that to me is like a real problem. 5-ish says we didn't have as many easy wins this regular season. It's true. The Nuggets had among the title contenders, I think the lowest mark of double-digit wins this season. They just kind of got through. And that's a real problem. They do need to find somebody to bring back the Bruce option. I don't know how. I'm not smart enough to know how. But they got to find somebody. They need a secondary ball handler on the floor sometimes. They need a secondary creator on the floor sometimes. And they've got to be able to defend and shoot a little bit. And that to me is like a big part of this, is that if they have Bruce Brown, I think they win this series. And again, that's not their fault. There was nothing they could do to retain Bruce. But they got to figure out how it is to replace that role because it was missing this season. And I want to be very clear. Christian Brown was expected to fill that role, and he didn't. Christian had an okay season and a good playoff series. Was not Bruce Brown. Peyton Watson was talked about as being better than Bruce Brown. Not yet. Maybe in the future. Not yet. Tucker Gita says, how hard is it to get a backup decent big to relieve Jokic? You see all these teams with multiple tower players, but we got Grandpa and DJ and a baby and Zeke. It's been a problem. I don't know how they solve that, but they're going to have to figure out a strategy. You need some redundancy, and that's very hard to find. It's just tough to make those kind of guys. Matthew says Jokic said himself they were hunting themselves at some point this year, if I recall. It's true. Hugh says, can you consider the Zeke extension a disaster? Doesn't look great, but we'll see how that looks in a year. Okay. I'm sorry I was wrong about Game 7. I'm sorry that the Nuggets lost Game 7, and I'm not being facetious there. I genuinely am sorry. You pour your heart into these games. This is brutal. Fans care so much, and this community is so vibrant and had such high hopes. And it's not done. You still have Nikola Jokic. We'll see how Jamal responds to the injury problems this year. We'll see if the Nuggets come back hungrier and better. They're going to have that opportunity because the last time they lost to the Minnesota Timberwolves in the last game of their season, it sparked their run to a title 5 years later. We'll see if they're able to get back there starting with this offseason. Have a great Monday. Adam's going to be with you on Monday afternoon. He's going to do a notebook show as well and do a solo show. Swipe with you on Tuesday, give his thoughts on the season. Then we'll do World's Finest on Wednesday and see where Adam and I are at in the aftermath of the season. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us all this season. Hope you guys have a great week. I'll see you guys again next time on Locked On Nuggets.